Welcome to the fastest stop in town. Today, Masechtas Bava Kama Daf Tes Zayin. We're going to begin on the bottom of Tes Vav Amud Beis by the Mishnah. Says the Masnisa, Chamisha Taman v'Chamisha Muwadim. There are 5 different situations in which the animal is considered tame, and 5 cases of a muad. So the Mishnah begins, Habehema in muedes. It's not considered to be a muad the first few times. Lo ligach, not when it gores. And Rashi helps us out here a little bit. Bekaren, with its horn. Vo ligoif, or to push with its body, which, as we said before, is also a told of Karen, which you only pay chatzi nezek. Vo lishoich, not to bite. Now, biting does not fall under the category of shein, because shein there's hana, here it's kavanasal hasik. Volirvoits, to crouch down on an item, volivoit, or to kick. And as we saw also at the beginning of this parak, kicking is not under regel because regel is the norm, derech hilucha, and this is again not the normal way of an animal to typically behave. So that's 5 categories, and they're all under the category of Karen, or it's a total of Karen. Hashain muedas lechlas aroila. So when it comes to an animal which you bechai the first time, is when it uses its teeth to eat something which it's fit to eat. Furthermore, haregel muedas lishbor b'derech hilucha. If it's walking, the very first time it breaks something in its normal pattern of its walking. V'shor hamuid, and a shor hamuid, which, as we understand, is even the cases above. Barashi says, Gimel Pamim, Ligach, Ligai. If it has a pattern of behavior, then it changes its status. It's no longer considered to be tam, but rather muad. V'shor hamazik b'rshus hanizik. And this is something which we also discussed. If you have an animal of the mazik, and it goes into the nizik's property and damages, obviously, the nizik's animal, so that's really pushing it. The other way around, as we saw, if the nizik's animal goes into my property, which is trespassing, so I can say, Torchaber shuti my boy, what my boy is, why is it here? Why is your animal going into my property? So actually I would be putter. But the other way around, if my animal goes into your property and does damage, so then I'm going to be chayav nezek shalom immediately. Va'adam. And also, because we're not just talking about animals, that's how I said it before, a person. So when it comes to a person is always going to be chayav 5. Rashi says, Vahari chamisha. Ubali chayim kamairi. Uhachil chashiv bor v'eish. Could have mentioned these other things, but we're talking about things that are alive. Then the Mishnah concludes, Hazev arba daba namar bardalis v'nachash hari el muad. The only time we make a distinction between tam and muad is when we're dealing with a shore. An ox, we say, starts off as a status of it not being wild, and therefore your own guard can be down a little bit when it comes to these animals. That's why you only pay chatzi nezek. Again, there's a question whether it's kanas or mamoin. But when it comes to these other animals, if you have animals such as a zav, an ari, a lion, a bear, a numer is usually translated as a leopard, bardulus, which is a question exactly what that is, but nachash and a snake. So these are muadim immediately. Rabbi Lezer Omer bezman b'nei tarbus in muadim, but nachash muad oilam. If you're able to somehow train them, and Rashi says shegidlun adam aveso. If you take these animals, for some reason, some of these animals, if they're in your house, so you can kind of domesticate them a little bit. So therefore, they may not necessarily be considered a muad the first time it damages, if you were able to nurture them to be a little bit more calm than the way that they would be in the wild. However, snakes are always considered to be a muad. They cannot be tamed, can't do anything with them. Says Gemara. Now, Midiktani Hashem Moedes Lachol. When we mentioned when is it that you're chayav nezek sholim, when it comes to an animal which eats something which it's normal to eat, mechlal the b'chatzar and nizik askinan. It must be we're talking about it goes into the courtyard of the nizik. Since we know when it comes to shein and regel, they're pater and reshus harabim. That's the din, as we saw in Gimel and Beis. When we talked about Chatzin Nizik Sravish over there, so Shein and Regel is Pater Reshus Harabim. So then this case must be this Reshus Nizik, that these animals actually went into the other person's property and did damage. Pikatani Behema in Moedes Shalom Kule. We said in an animal you don't pay everything. Avu Chatzin Nizik Mishalemes. When we're dealing with Karen, you only pay Chatzin Nizik, you only pay half damages, even though it entered into the Reshus HaNizik. So Mani, Rabban, he must be like the Rabban. The Amr Mishuna Karen B'chatzar Nizik, Chatzin Nizik, and Mishalim. So according, it's going to sit to Machlokes, the Rabban hold that when it comes to Karen, if it does damage in the Reshus HaNizik, in that case, you're chayav immediately Nezik Shalim. Ema Seifa, because it has to be, because we're talking about going through Reshus HaNizik, because the case of this of Shein has to be in Reshus HaNizik, can't be in Reshus Harabim, because Reshus Harabim be pater completely. So Ema Seif V'Shor Muid V'Shor Masi Reshus HaNizik V'Adam. Says what are cases where you are going to be chayav full damages? Shor Muid, Ashor that damages Reshus HaNizik. It says Beferish that if an animal gores in the Reshus HaNizik, you pay full damages. Ba'adam. So Atanu Rav Tarfin, the Amr Mashina Karen B'chatzah Nizik Shalom with the Misham. So Reish Rabbanim V'Seiv Rav Tarfin. L'char, it's a problem. How can the Mishnah be like two different opinions? Right, that's not a problem. In the Amr Shmuel Rabbi Yehuda, he said Shin Shavak Mastis and leave the Mishnayos alone, but Ta Abasroi, and go after me. Reish Rabbanim V'Seiv Rav Tarfin. It's better to not dismantle a Mishnah. So keep the Mishnah the way it is, and okay, it's two different opinions. The Reisha, because it's talking about Reshus HaNizik, because it's talking about Shein has to be Reshus HaNizik, and it says over there you pay Chatzin Nezik by Karen. And then the Sefer explicitly says that you pay Nezik Shalom by Karen, if it goes Reshus HaNizik. That's Rav Tarfon. Rabbi Lezer Mishmei the Rabbi, as we continue to test Zayin Amud Aleph. No, cooler Rav Tarfon he. Really, the entire Mishnah is like Rav Tarfon. So the Sefer is very clear. But how do we understand the Reisha? The Reisha says that when it comes to Karen, you only pay Chatzin Nezik. But that's not what Rav Tarfon holds if it's a Reshus HaNizik. So Reisha, because the Reisha is not talking about Reshus HaNizik. Our Reisha is B'chatzar HaMiyuchedes L'Peres L'Echad Mehen Ozel Shvar. That only one person had the ability to bring in their fruits, like a Chatzar Shutvin, but the other person does not have rights. So you have this person who has rights with the fruits. So the fruits is considered to be Reshus HaNizik. But the ox, anyone can go in there. So it's not considered like trespassing or going into a mazik, going into the Nizik's property, because it was allowed to be there anyway. So this is how we understand the ratio. Dolgabi Shein Havilei Chatzar Nizik, because it was eating fruit, which was exclusive rights for the Nizik to have their fruits there. So it's considered to be Reshus HaNizik property, which is the reason why you're chayiv for Shein. Gabi Karen have Reshus Harabim. However, because anyone could bring their oxen in there, so it's not considered anymore like Reshus HaNizik, it's like Reshus Harabim. So we can paint this picture that way, because otherwise, again, if Shein was talking about Reshus Harabim, you'd be pater. So we have to establish this case of Shein that it has to be Reshus HaNizik. But it doesn't mean the case of Karen has to be Reshus HaNizik. Okay. Amr Kahana. Let's look at Rashi. Skipping on. But Karen Chatinezik v'sulom mishum d'shvarm hu Reshus l'shneihem. U'Reshus Harabim damya. It's not a Reshus Harabim, but it's like that. And therefore it's not considered like Reshus HaNizik. Roy and, okay, fine. So Rav Kahana Amrisal Shmaisakim Rav Zvid Minarda. So this was said in front of Rav Zvid in this location. V'Yarmali, and he said, 1 second. Mi matzos mukmas kolok Rav Tarfin. How could you possibly establish, like the second shot, that really the ratio is like Rav Tarfin? Hakatani Hashem moedas lacholas haroyla. It says that when are you chayiv with Shane, who ate Rishus and Nizik, only if it eats foods which it's fit. Now, what's the diak? Obviously, Roy law in said, like for example, Rashi says pears and yerakos, fruits and vegetables. Shane Roy law loy. However, if it's not fit, for example, it eats ksus v'kelim, vessels and cup and garments. So in that situation, because it's mashuna, therefore you only pay chatzi nezek, because even though it's shane, but it's not eating lahanoscha, it's not for its own benefit. So therefore, in that situation, you would only pay chatzi nezek. Navi Rav Tarfin, Harmer mashuna karen b'chatzi nezek nezek shel mishalim. He doesn't make any distinction. He says when it comes to the karen categories of kavanas al-hazik, you still pay nezek shalim. But why does it say it this way? It must be making a diak and saying the only time you would pay nezek shalim is only when it comes to something in which is mashuna, which is royal to eat, fit for an animal to eat, fruits, vegetables. But if it's not, then you'd only pay chatzi nezek. But according to Rav Tarfin, you would still pay nezek shalim. El Rabbanan he. Really, the whole Mishnah is like the Rabbanan. So the Reisha makes a lot of sense. The Reisha clearly says that the Reisha says you pay chatzi nezek, and we're talking about the Reisha is talking about Rishus and Nizik. The Chasur and Mechsra. So how do you understand the Seifa is the problem? So there's words in Mishnah Chatani. Chamisha tamen hein. There's 5 tamen. Vim hu adu. If in any of these cases they become a muad, then chamishasan muadin. Then all 5 of them will now turn into the status of a muad. V'shen v'regel muadin betchilasan. As opposed to Karen, Shin and Regel, you're moved immediately. The Heichen HaDatan, and where did it do its damage, and where did it become a muad? The Chatzar HaNizik. It took place in the Chatzar HaNizik, and that's what it's telling. Okay. Says Rashi, V'im hu'adu chamishtan v'hainu detani chamishim muadin. So Mishnah only means those 5 tamim will become 5 muadim. That's all it's telling you. That's what it's saying. Okay. Maskav Ravina. Hakatani l'kaman. We're going to learn later on that shor hamazer rishus and nizik. If you have the animal of mine which does damage and went into someone else's property, did damages there, and you have to be chayiv. Ketzad. What exactly is the case? If you want to tell me, it's talking about. It says Rashi b'karen tama rishus and nizik. That's referring to this animal walked in to the Rishus and Nizik as it did damage with its horn, and it was a tam, and you still pay Nezek Shalem even the very first time. It says Rashi, Hainu Tiktani Pirusha Beperik Beis Ketzad. That's why we're going to see later on in the next parak, it explains this. Mishum Hachi Ketani Ketzad. Eli Iamr Loy Ariba my Ketzad. If in fact this is not the case, then why is the second parak begin Ketzad Haregel? It's explaining based on what was said before, obviously. So it must, in fact, be based on the connection between these 2 Mishnayos that we are talking about a case of Karen Tama going to Rishus and Nizik. So you actually have to change the words a little bit more than that. So you're right. Again, there's 5 different cases of Karen or their toldos, and if they end up doing these things multiple times, a few times, they become a muad. Okay, the Shen Regel muad and the Shen Regel are muad immediately, and then we had this also. V'zehu shor hamuad, and that is when we're referring to a shor hamuad. And then it says, that's it. He throws it in and says, this is actually machlokas. Just got to throw that right into the Mishnah there. There are cases which are similar to it, since there's a zev, arim, dov, bardulus, vanamer, benachash, these other animals, that will be a muad right away. Tanya nami hachi. We also learned something similar to this. Chamisha tamin hain. There are 5 tamin. V'im huadu chamishtan muadin. And after doing enough toldos of Karen, you end up becoming a muad. The shem regel muadim and chilasan. Shem regel is muadim the first time. V'zehu shar hamuad. V'shor mazim v'shos and nizem. Machos after rabbanon. And then he continues, as the Seif would say, v'yesh muadim acherim. There's other cases where you muad right away. Ki yaitze be'elu hazev ari b'doi b'namar b'bardos v'nachash. Okay. And if that wasn't enough for you, Ikud darami la mirma. Some people ask it as a contradiction. Tanat. Chamisha, it says in the Mishnah, Chamisha tava chamisha muadin, v'suleika. You tell me there's only 5, and that's it. V'ika hazev, v'ha'ari b'tov v'namar b'bardos v'nachash. We see there's many other cases of muad. So what do you mean there's only 5? Mashani, we say, no, that's not what the Mishnah means when it says there are 5 cases of muad. Mashani Amar Ravina, Chasir Maxim Hachatani, Chamisha Taman Hain, V'im Huadu Chamishtan. Muadim. It doesn't mean that there's only 5 cases of a muad, but it means the 5 times in which there is a din of Karen or toldos of Karen, that it's a tam. Eventually, those five will become a muad. It doesn't mean that there's only those cases. There's many other cases of a muad. V'shein v'regel muadim et chilasan. V'zeh shar muad v'shar hamazah v'shos nizim v'chos v'aftar v'rabbanan. Okay. All right. Okay. No questions on this. At least the main question line. Let's see if there's a question over here. Nope. Not on TA yet. And TB. Weiter. Okay. So he said that one of the toldos of Karen in which you pay Chatzi Nezek is if it crouches down. Rabbi Lezer, Lo Shanu, the only time we say this din is El Pachim Kedaylim, if it breaks large kalim. Aval Pachim Ketanim, small ones, Urchehu, it's the normal way. So, because if they're really large, that's Mishuna, that's unusual, and therefore you're going to be only paying, let's say, Chatzi Nezek. However, when you're dealing with pachim katanim, which are small, so it is the way for it to crouch on it, and therefore, because of that, Yutaka would be chayiv as a din regel. So let's prove this. An animal is muad when it walks in its normal way. L'shaver, to break, and it says lama'ech, and to squash. As a adam, as a behemoth, as a kalim. So it says that kalim can be squashed, and you attack a pay nezek shalim. So because why? Because if we're dealing with pachim katanim, so then in fact that is under the category of regel, and therefore that's the distinction. Where's the note? Dilma min atzad. Dilma min atzad. Says Rashi. Haritani muedes lemoich. When it says that it's a mued for squashing, labravitza elaminat sad kishihima halechas. While it's walking, v'yesh betzida kalim, on its side there's vessels. Mamachtan beina lekaisel, and basically he's squeezing himself between this kli and it's a vessel. V'zuhi she'amr hazika begufa derech hilucha dahavi told the regel. So that's a case of being a tol deregel. Not that it's actually like crouching down on it, but it's walking, derech hilucha. And that maybe is when you're chayav, but lav dafka is this necessarily a raya that when it comes to pachim katani, you would be chayav through regel. Okay, so that's the answer. That's how we say no, because dilma min atzad. Igid yami something amar belezel lotem pachim gedolim hu dolav orchei. Aval pachim katanim orchehu elafil pachim katanim nami lav orchehu. So according to this, pachim katanim It wouldn't make any difference. When it comes to Pachim Gedolim and even Pachim Katanim, the din is that you're going to be only chayiv as told of Karen Chatzi Nezek. So question 9. Behema Sharavtsa V'Shavra Pachim Katanim Mahadin. So it says here, Pluktehi. I would just say it's a machlokas. Let's see what it says. Im told the regel, if it's a told of regel, Mishalemis Bershus and Nezik Shalom. Okay, really breaks it down. So it's a regel. If it's a Bershus and Nizik, you pay the full amount. And it's just a Rabbi, you're going to be potter. If it's a told of Karen, then you pay Chatzi, then you only have to pay Chatzi Nezik as the Tom. Okay. So it kind of really breaks it down a little bit more. But yeah, of course, there's a major nafkamina if it falls on the category of regel or Karen, because regel, the din is that you're pater b'rishus harabim. Meisvei. So the Gemara asks the following question. So the case of when it's squashing person, animals, or vessels. So l'chayra, we see over here that it should fall in the category of regel. Rabbi Lezer dilma min atzad. You can ask this as contradiction. Town of Lirvoitz, which is Karen. That sounds like it's, why is that? It's regel. So Rabbi Lezer kasha kan b'pachim gedolim pachim katanim. If we're dealing with pachim gedolim, that's not normal, and therefore because it's mishunin, it falls on the category of Karen. However, if it's small vessels, then it's under the category of regel. Again, it's not clear if that's true. The din is by regel. Then the din by pachim katanim if it's a din regel. Okay. So as I didn't know the answer to this question, how to translate the word bardalus, my bardalus. Gemara doesn't know either, so I guess it was okay that I didn't know it in the Mishnah. I knew that the Gemara didn't know it. Rabbi Yehuda, Gemara answers, no problem. I'll give you a great answer that you'll know the answer. Nafraza. Good? No, my nafraza. What does that mean? So Rav Yosef Apa, and it's some type of some people may translate it now as like it's a panther or sorts. Mezer Meir Omer Afat Savoa. It says also Tzavoa. Says Rashi, Hani Umasnisin Moisif. So it's like adding on to this other animal. So Rabbi Lezer Omer Afanachash. So I didn't translate Tzavoa for a reason. The Omer of Yosef Tzavoa Zu Apa. So that's a problem, because if we're saying that bardalus is apa, then how can we have someone else say not only an apa but also an apa? What? Obviously that means bardalus is not afa. Lokasha kambat savo zachar kambat savo nekeva. It depends. One is male and one is female. So as Rashi says, the bardalus, the masnisin, who's savo zachar. A male panther, that's all just translated. It's not so posh, that's what it means. V'alav ka'im Rav Yosef savua zu apa. Rameir moisef av savua nekeva. Even the female panther, delushme apa. Fine. So, in other words, it's possible that this animal, its the female counterpart is less wild. So you would think maybe it's not a muad right away. No, it is. The Sanya. Savoa Zachar Lachar Sheva Shanim Nasa Atalef. This is why it's a little bit hard to translate it. It's poshed as an animal that we're familiar with, because this may be an animal that we're not so familiar with. It says, this animal, after 7 years, it becomes an Atalef, which is generally translated as a bat. Atalef Lachar Sheva Shanim Nasa Arpad, and it becomes this other creature. Arpad Lachar Zain Shanim Nasa Kimoish. Kimush Lachar Sheva Shanim, after 7 years, Nasa Choach. The Choach Shanim, Sheva Shanim Nasa Shade. It turns into a demon. Shidra Shaladim Lachar Sheva Shanim Nasa Nachash. It says that the spine of a person after 7 years doesn't mean when you're 7 years old, it means 7 years after the death. Nasa Nachash becomes like a snake. There's only someone who does not bow down at moedim. So bowing down at moedim strengthens your spine so it does not become a nachash. Now, what does that mean? when a person bows down, what it basically means is that you show humility and you show appreciation and gratitude to Hashem. A nachash is the opposite. A nachash is not a creature based on the story of Adam Chava who is appreciative and in fact tries to take away from other people, cause other people to fall into sin. So if you're a person that does not bow down to Hashem, which means you lack those values of recognizing appreciation and gratitude, and therefore you really have disconnected yourself to God, so then your essence, your spine, what you stand up for, you're really a nachash. You're like a snake. Amar Mar, Rameir Omer Afat Savoya. So he said that is inclusive as we continue now to test Zion Amud Beis. Rabbi Lazar Omer Af Hanachash. He says also a snake. V'adan Tanan, Rabbi Lazar Omer Bizman Shein B'nei Tarbus. He said that if they're trained or they're domesticated a bit, animal wadam Hanachash Model Oilam. So how could he say Af Hanachash? Your answer is Tani Nachash. Instead, you just say the word Nachash and that's it. Says Rashi, Nachash lo. A Nachash is a mu'id, but not these. So he says Tani Nachash. Okay. Omer Shmuel, Ari Rishus Harabim. So let's say you have a lion in the middle of the Rishus Harabim. Probably not a good place to hang out if you knew it was a lion there. Doras ba'achol potter. Taraf achol chayiv. So let's understand this. Lions eat their prey while they're still alive. This is the normal way. This is considered to be normal. If it tears it apart first, which kills it, then that's mashuna. That's unusual. So therefore now we can understand the Mishnah. An Ari Rishus Harabim, which Doras Achal, which is with its chain, is going to be potter. Why? Because we know that Shein Rishus Harabim, if it's the normal way of the animal behaving, then you're going to be potter Rishus Harabim. So that's the din we said, regular Rishus Harabim, you're potter. So it's the same thing by an Ari that is Doras V'achal, which means it eats the prey while it's still alive. That's normal for a lion, and therefore that falls in the category of Shein, and therefore Shein Rishus Harabim is potter. However, it's Taraf Achol you're chayiv. If it tears apart, that's not normal for it first to tear the animal apart, and therefore, because of that, it doesn't fall into the category of regel anymore. It's like Karen. And Karen is chayiv in Rishus Harabim. So the Gemara explains. Since it's normal to eat the prey while it's still alive, it's just like an animal eating fruits and vegetables. So that's the reason why, because it's like a shein in the Rishus Harabim. That's why you're potter. However, taraf, if it tore the animal apart first, lav orchehu, that's not the normal way, and therefore because of that, you're chayiv als Karen. Remember the trifle lav orchehu. Are you telling me a lion tearing an animal apart and killing it before it eats it, that's not normal? That is the way a lion behaves. V'oksiv aryeh toyref, that the lion will rip and tear an animal apart b'dei goyroisav, for the sake of its cubs. Because where it says, yeah, that's b'shvil goyroisav. In other words, a lion itself is very strong, so it can eat the animal while it's still alive. It eats its prey while it's still alive. But its young cubs are not able to eat that way because they'll get hurt by the animal if it's still alive. So therefore, the lion must first kill the prey in order to feed its young. So Gemara says, it also says, excuse me, Lili Voisov. It says that also it will strangle the animal for its lioness. The answer again is Beshvil Levioisov, not for itself. That pasuk is v'yamali teref chayrov, that will fill up its lion's den. Yeah, it's b'shvil chayrov. It's for the holes. In other words, he may necessarily do this, but it's not in order to eat it right away. He brings it into his den, again, possibly for its young or it's the lioness to eat. U'ma'oinoisav terefa. It says inhabitants, again, it rips it apart. It's b'shvil ma'oinoisav, again, it's for its inhabitants. V'asanya. Fine. V'asanya. V'chein chaya, so too when it comes to a wild, undomesticated animal, shenichnas l'chatzar nizik, that enters into the nizik's property, tarpa behema v'achla basim misham nizik shalim. If it's tarfa, if it tears it apart, then you will have to pay nezik shalom. So we see clearly that when a behema rips an animal apart and kills it and eats it, that is its normal way. So hakmaskinan shetarful haniach. That's referring to a case where it ripped it apart, lahaniach, to leave it be. Says Rashi, latzniya urche lahareg, and to hide it, if you will. That's its norm. Ha'achla katani. I mean, it says it's for eating. It says b'shenimuchav achla. It's because it changed its mind and decided later on to eat it. So menaya dinan. How do you know what's going on in the brains of a lion? V'od dishmul nami demahachihu. Maybe it's the same thing. So Rav Nachman Bar Yitzchak with stud in katani. This is actually have to read it on its sides. Shetarfa haniach. If the animal was torn apart and it was set aside, o dars of achla, or it ripped it apart and ate it, mishalemes nezek shalom. So certainly, if it eats the prey while alive, then you're definitely chayiv because that's normal. Also, if it was torn apart for it to be left, then also that's normal. However, if it would be tarfa and eat for the sake of the lion itself, then that would not be normal. Ravina Omer Kikar Shmuel Ba'ari Tarbut. He's referring to a tamed lion. It's not normal because it should never do harm because it is tamed. Says Rashi, really, maybe it is normal for it to tear it apart and eat it. But over here that he says you're chayiv reshus harabim, why would you be chayiv if it's considered to be under the category of regal? You should be under the category of shein reshus harabim your potter. It's because this is a tamed lion, therefore it should not have happened, and therefore it is mishana. Yihachi nafil dar senami mechayiv, so it should always be chayiv. Doesn't matter, no matter what it does. El dervina lava shmul itmar elav masnisa kikatana masnisa ba'ari tarbut. Our sugya is referring to this tamed lion. So why do we say you only pay half? So diayit because it became wild. My high tiny gabi told the shane, gabi told the Karen boy misney. It shouldn't be under the category of shane at all. It should be under the category of Karen. And this is a kasha. Let's look at this Taisus. Actually, before I do, let's look at question 10. We'll go weiter, but let's see some questions first. Be'ez oifen havi nezek da'ari orche upotter b'rshus harabim. When is it normal? So it's certainly normal if it's dars v'achal, that if it eats the prey while it's still alive, or as we said, tar fahaniach, that he kills it and leaves it for later. So it makes sense. He may not be hungry, but he wants to still have food for maybe in a few hours from now. So he'll kill it and then eat it later. So that's also normal. But if it just kills it to eat it, that's not considered to be normal. So therefore, under the categories where it's normal, which is either dars of achal, tarf lahaniach, then it's shane, and therefore it's considered to be your pater v'rshus harabim. Okay, now let's look at TA4. Ari, you have a lion that says she'en ben tarbut, which is not domesticated. A regular lion should daras or taraf. Him havi orchu pater v'rshus harabim olo. Very well said. So it's the same answer basically. If it's Daras, if it eats it alive, that's normal. The taraf, if it rips it apart, if it kills it to eat, that's not normal. Laniach havi urche litroif. But if it leaves it alone, then if obeshvil garaisav v'voisav, or he saves it for his young, havi urche litroif. Okay, so again, it's basically the same idea as what we saw before, that when it normally will eat the animal while it's alive, unless it wants to leave it, in which the din is then he would actually kill it first and then eat it later. That's also orchin be pat b'rshus harabim. Okay, TB5. Rav tzah behema al kalim b'rshus harabim mahadin. Okay, this is really similar to question 9. So let's see, this is TB5. So according to one opinion, maybe you're only going to be chayiv like Karen, which is not normal, by pachim gedolim. Pachim ketanim is a machlokus. This is what I wrote. Yim pachim gedolim zemeshuna. V'oz yesh din batam chatzin nezek kedin Karen. Perfectly said. Im pachim ketanim yesh machlokus im zed din regel. Oz poter b'rshus harabim legamri. O kedin Karen. Beautifully answered. Okay, so that was TB 5. All right. We're going to see the next Mishnah. Okay. Says the Masnis. Ma bin Talmud. We had this before. What's the difference? Only 2 differences. That you pay half or full, and when it comes to an animal as a tom, you only pay up until it's the value of the animal, even if it did much more damage than that. But a mu'id, you always pay the full amount. Says the Gemara, my aliyah. What does that mean? Like aliyah sounds like an attic. So I'm Rabbi Lazar b'ma'ula shemnechasav. It means like the top of the possessions. That Chizkiyahu lay down with his fathers, and he was buried b'male kivri b'nei David. Here the b'male means like by the best of the kvaros in by b'nei David. And Rashi pre-Torah says b'chizki ksiv b'sefer divrei hayomim. Okay. The Yom Rabbi Lezer b'male etzel meulim shemishpacha. So it means like the best in the family. Yumaninhu davdu shloimai. So that's what it's referring to in this pasuk. V'yikbaruhu b'kvroisav asher kara b'ir David. So Chizkiyahu was buried, which was dug in the city of David. V'yashkivuhu b'mishkav, and he was lying down. Asher mile basamim uzanim, filled with basamim uzanim. So what is that? My basamim uzanim. So Rabbi Lezer Omer zany, says Rashi. Mini basamim harbe. There's a lot of different spices in the area. Shmuel bar Nachmani Omer besamim shekol hamarech behen bolei zima. Anyone who was near these spices, it caused zima to unfold. Okay. Before we go weiter in this sugya, let's look at this Tosos, which is actually, I should have talked about it before. It says, if you don't bow down by modim, so then your backbone will turn to a snake. Tosos is lefisha mitzvah chroya. It's a mitzvah to bow down. Zokiv kechivya. Interesting quotes down the Gemara in Brachos, that a person, when they bow down, they're supposed to bow down like a stick, However, when they get up, they're supposed to get up like a snake. So very like slowly, in different motion. So therefore, Tosa says that's mida keneged mida. But nasa nachash zu oinsha shignaihu loy b'mashe nasa nachash. So since you didn't make your bones into like a snake rhythm when you were in modim, so therefore that's the punishment. Look at this Tosis. Sheish etzem b'shidrei shel adam shimimenu noitzu lasalavo. Says that there's a bone in your body that will regenerate itself to create you in the world to come. Ve'oiso etzem chazak, it's very strong. Ve'kasha kol kakshin eish yachol sarfo. Even fire, normal fire cannot destroy it. V'hashta kishoiso etzem nas nachash, when that bone becomes a snake, eno chai lasalavoi, you won't be able to live. Ve'en svar loimer shein einish gadol kol kach b'shvil oven zeh. It's hard to imagine this. So it's basically saying it's hard to understand. So he didn't bow down by Moedim. So now all of a sudden he's not there'll be no Tchias HaMesim for him. So perhaps it's deeper than just not bowing. It is, again, the lack of Hakar Satov, not being Moed to Kodesh Baruch Hu. It's more than just you don't bow. It's maybe what's behind it. Okay. So I want to see that Tais is very fascinating. Weiter. So in Sefer Yirmiyah it says, Kikaru shucha lilachdeni upachim tamnu ragloi. It says that there was a pit that caused me to be falling, and traps that were hiding by my feet. Belezer omer shechashaduhu mizayna. He was suspected of being with a Zayna. Says Taisus the Yirmiyah Kayin Havi, the Zayna Sur Kayin. So this is referring to Yirmiyah, and he was a Kohen, and he's also to, and the Zayna is also to a Kayin. So therefore, this was the this is what he was being accused of. Shmuel bar Nachmani Omer shechashduhu me'eshes ish. He was actually accused of being with a married woman. It actually says the word Zaina. No, if a person is involved in Eishes Ish, that woman also takes upon herself the status of Zaina. That I understand Hashem knows their intention is to cause me harm and for me to be killed. So they're accusing me of something which is a capital offense. Right? What's the din? A Zaina is not a chi of Misa, only Eishes Ish is. So your answer is Shishlichu Libertit. That he would be cast into a muddy well. So, what exactly does this mean? That is what was the threat, that they were going to actually kill him. Darsh Ravamanik, when it says in the pasuk here, that their stumblers before you, be'esapcha, the time of your anger, asbehem, sarmi yirmov negodesh baruch hu, Rebbeinu Shalom, avil b'shah sha'isen tzedakah. Even the time in which you do acts of kindness, hachshilem b'vnei adam shenim huganim, cause those people to stumble, kadesha yikabel lehen sachar, that they should not receive any reward. Let's see if we should go by doing it. Yeah. Avoid asulo b'maisam alamid sheishiva yeshiva al kivroi. That after Yirmiyah died, they actually put a yeshiva by his kever. Taisa says over here, "V'lo al kivro mamish el barach lekaber almost to leko legorosh." Can't have a yeshiva mamish on top of a cemetery, but nearby. So pligimor Rav Nosson Rabban Mechado Imer Shloisha. One says, so yeshiva Rashi says, Talmidim Lasad Shom Torah Shloisha. What does it mean? Shloisha Yomim Toshiva Shom Yeshiva. 3 days they established this yeshiva. As we continue in Zayin Aleph, the Chadar is Shiva. Some say 7 days. Yermol Shloishim. And some say 30. Adkan.